What's up, everyone? Philly Insider. We're here doing a pod. Oddly enough, I thought we'd be doing this pod talking about potential trade targets still as of a week ago. And Drew, we already have two guys who we traded for. I'm honestly kind of shocked. I like the last 3 years, it's been on deadline day we have made deals. I haven't had a July 29th or July 30th or 31st where I haven't been doing a trade deadline eve preview. And here we are. Honestly, like they may make another move or two, but this is the bulk of what we're going to get. These are the two main moves, I think it's safe to say. And I'm really happy. I gave my thoughts in the video yesterday and then on the Hayes live stream as well. So I want to give you the floor to talk just generally about what happened, and then we'll dive into each of them specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like those level of prospects like Classen and Aldegari, I mean, those were kind of guys that you were expecting to maybe give up because they were having such good seasons. Like they both have had exceptional seasons, really. I mean, that's just a nice way to put it. But I mean, Classen, he was obviously a big arm coming out of college, but he just had no location. So, I mean, it's just he's such a high risk guy because he couldn't throw strikes in college. And I mean, it's such a risk whenever a guy can't do that. And the Phillies obviously have good pitching development and they found something with him. But I don't know that I trust the Angels to exactly replicate what the Phillies were doing for him. But I mean, just generally though, I mean, overall, if you're giving up those two prospects and you're getting two guys, which the one deal they didn't give up any prospects in, which really helped because it allowed them to go bigger with the reliever deal. So, I mean, I think overall though, like what you got versus what you gave, I mean, you got to give to get. So I think it's okay.
Like you said, as soon as that Hayes deal broke, I think the biggest thing was obviously it opened up a spot in the bullpen. And like you said, you really didn't give up anything. I mean, at best, Sir Anthony was going to be your fifth or sixth arm out of the pen this year. He just hasn't been the same guy over recent seasons. Last year, he was still pretty good, I would say, but he definitely hasn't been his 2022 self. And you look at the trade they made for Estevez. Obviously, I think it's definitely an overpay, but again, it's one of those things where like you're usually overpaying at this time of year. That's just how it goes. That's the trade deadline. It's the nature of the market. And you're getting a guy who slots right into high leverage innings in the back, in the front, not the back of your bullpen, but I guess it depends on how you classify, but front end of the bullpen. He's going to be one of your first guys that's going to come into some of those spots. You have him and Hoffman and Kirkering from the right side, and you have Alvarado and Strom from the left side. And even if Alvarado doesn't really figure things out, that's still a really good top four with Strom and all the others. And I would think that Kirkering kind of bounced back the other day too. Like I'm not really worried about him. He just had like 3 or 4 games that weren't the best. But point being, that top 5 is really, really good. Man, I don't know too many teams that have that good of a top 5. And then Gregory Soto as your 6th guy who's really not going to pitch in many high leverage spots. That's fine. I mean, again, he's a frustrating pitcher. He gets put in a high leverage spot and he immediately blows it. That's kind of been the story with him in Philadelphia thus far, unfortunately. But the rest of the bullpen is really, really good outside of him. And adding Estevez, man, it not only lengthens it, but it gives you another guy who can pitch in those spots because of the arsenal he has. And I don't know which trade do you want to talk about first specifically? Do you want to talk about Austin Hayes first, or do you want to talk about Estevez?
I mean, I think we're on the topic, so might as well just keep going with Estevez.
Sure. Yeah. I'll say this, Drew, just to start off, and I'll let you talk. I've been doing trade videos for 3 years, since 2021. I think that was first year. I've only ever seen 2 guys of my videos actually get traded for by the Phillies. And obviously they're not going to trade for all of them, but it was Ian Kennedy and Noah Syndergaard. So you have a little bit of a higher hit rate so far on 1 out of 2 trade videos for you, and you already got 1 hit. So I wanted to congratulate you on that. But no, in all seriousness, though, yeah, if you guys haven't seen that video, go check it out. Drew did a video on Estevez way before the trade happened. I mean, I really like this deal again, like I said, but I want to let you kind of dive into it a little bit more. What are your thoughts on, obviously, the package? You talked about that a little bit, but also just the pitcher that Estevez is.
Yeah, I mean, he's really, really good. And that's just, I mean, he's a back-end guy. He's been getting saves for the last handful of years for the Angels, and I think he's played in 1 postseason, so that'll definitely be a big challenge for him this season. But, I mean, I love him. I mean, that's why I did a video on him, because I love him so much, and he has electric stuff. He's got very similar like stuff to what Sir Anthony had, actually. He throws that slider and he throws a 98-mile-an-hour fastball. So it's like putting somebody that's got better control than Sir Anthony in Sir Anthony's spot. And it's going to be so fun because he doesn't walk guys. That's what I love. That's why I love him. he walks guys and he doesn't walk guys and he strikes a ton of guys out. So, I mean, like you said, you have to give up pretty good prospects for him, but I think that's just the price you pay this time of year, like you said.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, having a guy who can throw 97, 98 coming out of the pen, always valuable, especially when you have Caleb Cotham as your pitching coach. And as you mentioned, this is probably his best year as a big leaguer. I think that goes without saying. We will obviously see how he finishes the year, and with a change of scenery, that's always a question mark with any reliever, especially reliever, any trade target you pick up, but especially relievers. That's just the nature of it, is things can fall off. But from what we've seen, again, the walk rate, it seems like it's almost been cut in half. I mean, it was probably above 10% in years prior, and now he's only walking guys at a 4% rate. He's really not putting many guys on. And yes, he is giving up harder contact in the zone now that he's living in the zone a little bit more. But out of those two options, I'd rather live with the hard contact than live with the walks, because walks always seem to score, and you can't afford that in the playoffs. So I just think they're going to figure something out to where he's going to limit hard contact a little bit more. And it also depends on what type of contact you're giving up to. I mean, if it's a ground ball to an infielder 99% of the time, I obviously haven't looked at whether it is with Carlos or not, you're going to be fine. And he's getting outs. Like, he's getting results. And like you said, he's striking a lot of guys out. So yeah, sure, they're hitting the ball hard, but a lot of the time they're not even making contact. So, I mean, if that's going to be the case, I think I can live with that. And it's a rental. So you did overpay a little bit considering he's not going to be here beyond this year, but also you would have had to give up a lot more if he was going to be here beyond this year. Because look at the Jason Adam deal from today. Yeah, we weren't going to be able to pay that price. And even Yimi Garcia too, he went for a decent price as well. So the big thing I liked about Jimmy Garcia was that he was having the best year, probably the best year of his career. Got hurt. Carlos didn't get hurt. I mean, he's healthy right now. I don't believe he did this year. I'm pretty sure he's pitched the whole year.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, and another guy who is also having the best year of his career, you want to get relievers when they're peaking, because you see, like, that prime for a bullpen piece may only last 2 or 3 years at most. Some guys are really good to where it lasts beyond that, but a lot of guys just have a couple good years. I think that's what some people fear with Alvarado right now. That's a different topic for another time, but point being, it happens. So you're getting this guy when he's at the height of his game right now. No better time to pull the trigger on that deal. So that's kind of what I have on him. Again, like you said, the slider is really nasty. The fastball, obviously he has heat there. I think he throws a changeup occasionally to lefties, as you mentioned in your video. Not very often, but it's another weapon to have against. And like you put in our chat the other day, which I also saw, was he's given up the same batting average against to righties and lefties this year. I think it's 169. So the guy hasn't really had issues. Sometimes that can be a problem, obviously, with guys having lefty-righty splits. There's really not many major red. The only red flag with him is what happened at the end of last year in the second half collapse. That's really the only thing. And again, he's having a much better year this year. You would figure it's probably not going to happen. Again, always a chance it could, but I don't know. That's what I got on him as a pitcher. And I'll let you talk about the package or anything else you want to talk about on him as a player. But I really like the deal.
Yeah, I mean, like the package we gave up. I mean, I think everybody at this point kind of knows who Classen is. He's obviously a big arm, throws 98 mile an hour, gets up to 100 or more, and he has nasty off speed. So, I mean, you hate losing a guy like that, especially when he's in the middle of a breakout year, and maybe he's just going to keep getting better. Maybe he's not going to. I mean, that's exactly the risk you run when you trade like a high tier prospect whenever they're at the peak of their value or what their value has been. Obviously, if he keeps improving, his value is going to be much higher than what it is right now, and the Phillies are going to look like idiots if Estevez doesn't work out and if they don't win a ring. But I mean, it's a risky run. I mean, you have to give up prospects to get good players. You have to give up good prospects to get good players, I should say. And obviously, out of Gary, he was not a flamethrower, but he was getting extremely good results this year, and everybody was kind of high on him in the organization, and guys that do like prospect rankings, like Matt Winkelman really valued him highly, which was definitely odd considering that he doesn't throw hard like the rest of the guys do. But I mean, the Phillies definitely have some special pitching development, and they just drafted a ton of college pitchers, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, those spots are going to get filled in the farm system pretty quick. I mean, relievers, obviously, a lot of the college guys they drafted were relievers. So, I mean, obviously relievers aren't highly touted like starters are in prospect rankings, but I mean, you saw what Sir Anthony was when he first came up. He was a total game changer, and it's kind of a shame to see him go. I'll just talk about that real quick. I mean,
Yeah, please
everybody
do.
loves Sir Anthony. He was such a good guy. He was obviously a great clubhouse guy, and he was very, very good for us for a number of years. And it's a shame to see him go this way whenever he was kind of at his lowest. I mean, it's a shame, really. I mean, he was so good for us in the last couple of playoff runs, and everybody's just going to miss him. I mean, I really don't have too much to say other than that, but it's a shame.
It is. I mean, 2022, I don't think there's too many other Phillies relievers you could point to and say they were that dominant in October. It's a very select list. And he's one of those guys who he set the tone in that postseason. In that wild card game, too, he comes up against Arenado and Goldschmidt and makes it look easy. And that postseason, he was just locked down. The only time he had an issue was when it was raining in Game 5 of the NLCS. And maybe he had an issue in the World Series. I can't remember. But that guy was the guy you wanted in those spots. You wanted Sir Anthony to face the middle of the order most of the time that year. And he did an incredible job. Even last year, he was not himself, and he still had a scoreless postseason. The guy had really big postseason moments, and he put himself in some jams last year too. He absolutely could have folded, and he didn't. Obviously, this year was not going the way he wanted it to. It's really unfortunate. But like you said, whenever anyone was mad at him, as far as the fan base goes, it was never anyone rooting against him because that guy was a class act through and through. Awesome dude. Like you said, everyone liked him. He was a great teammate. Even when he was in Baltimore doing his first post-game press conference, he says he'd still love to see the Phillies get a ring at some point. That takes a lot of respect and a lot of class to say something like that when they just traded you away after you have been with them since 2011. I mean, these international guys sign at a very young age. So for Sir Anthony to just take that approach and just be the guy he is, man, I mean, you got to respect that. So thank you to Sir Anthony. He did incredible things while he was here. And this year just didn't work out. Really weird career arc. I mean, that's got to be one of the weirdest career timelines I think you've seen between the injuries and the bump, the highs and the lows. Like the highs were very high. The lows were obviously very low. But for the most part, he was a really, really good bullpen piece for them. And the only other thing I have to say on that trade, and we'll get to Austin Hayes in a second here, but as far as that trade goes, Christian Pache, not necessarily the hardest goodbye to make. He was hitting lefties last year. He was a great glove both years, but he was not hitting lefties this year, and it's a pretty easy replacement there. And he was going to get DFA'd no matter what. So I just wanted to say that real quick. But the one thing I wanted to say, too, was on the prospects. Again, you have to give up something to get something. And It sucks to see Hao-Yu Lee. Like, I'm not rooting against him, but it does suck to see him doing well in Detroit because Lorenzen's not on the team anymore, and that didn't really pan out too well for us. And you gave up a pretty big prospect for Lorenzen. I mean, Hao-Yu Lee was our number 5 guy on Pipeline. I know Pipeline's not the most reliable, but he was high on other lists as well. I would say he was pretty consistently a top 10 guy, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. But obviously, he's hitting pretty well. I believe the last I checked, he's hitting well with Detroit in Double A, I want to say it is. And it hurts. But then you see a guy like William Bergoya in the system this year who is probably going to – he's essentially in the same spot Hao-Yu Lee was in. He's blocked at the major league level, still a couple years away from being a 40-man guy. And he's played really well. I mean, he's got a really good approach at the plate. Obviously, we know he's the challenge guy, as Alex Carr told us. He's the guy who has 100% hit rate on balls and strikes. So the guy knows the zone like the back of his hand. And you have him still in the system right now. So like you said, they drafted like 7 college pitchers in a row in the last 7 rounds of that draft. Yeah. Like, it does suck to see George Classen and Sam Aldegheri go. It does. But at the same time, like you said, Classen, he's far from a finished product. And maybe he figures it out in LA. I certainly don't think that's the best place to be developed as a pitcher, just my opinion. But I think the results speak for themselves over there. That being said, like, look, he was pitching well. At the same time, he did hit a little bit of a wall in Lakewood, if I'm not mistaken. Like, he wasn't perfect over there. And he was pitching really well in Clearwater, but all these guys pitch well in Clearwater. It's really the biggest transition is when you're going to go to Reading and see if things are going to translate over there. And the transitions only get harder from there on out. So we really don't know what he's going to be. I love Sam Aldegheri. I probably liked him more than Classen, if I'm being honest, just because, like you said, he doesn't throw hard. 94, 95 from the left side with the off speed he has and the breaking stuff he has. I like that. I mean, I think he had potential for sure. But they already have a full rotation at the major league level. And again, he's not really necessarily close to joining that rotation anytime soon, even though he was in Double A. Part of that could also be moving him up. I don't think you move him up solely for trade value, but it could be part of it. But point being, it's like you got to give up those 2 guys to go get a guy. And again, there are going to be guys who fill those spots in the minor league pitching development. Like it's just going to happen. The Phillies are doing a good job with it so far. I know Mick Abel has not pitched well in AAA. I know Griff McGarry, he's injured, but he's just coming back. But I know that transition hasn't gone well so far. They have time, and they will find other guys to fill the lower levels. I bet you this time next year we're going to be talking about some guy in Clearwater or Lakewood, or a couple of them who are pitching really, really well. And you still kept Gene Cabrera too, who maybe he gets traded for another guy. I don't know. Deadline's not here yet, but that's a guy who people like too, and probably around. I would say probably in the same tier as those. Without watching him or knowing a lot, he was talked about in the same tier as those guys, and as a potential trade target too. So you didn't give up all of them. But that I just wanted to say that. All right, I'm not rambling, but I wanted to talk about that deal a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean it's ultimately probably going to end up being a win-win if I were to guess. I mean, there's a pretty high chance that Klassen's going to at least be a good reliever in the major leagues at some point. Aldegari, I mean, there's absolutely no guarantees with him because of how slow he throws. I mean, it's hard to make it into the major leagues nowadays unless you're throwing gas. And I mean, obviously it happens. I mean, no doubt about it. But Aldegari is definitely not a finished product. And I think people see these rankings and they're like, oh, just because this guy's like our number 7 prospect, he's like a guaranteed hit. Like he's not our number 1 prospect. He's not Andrew Painter. I mean, if you're the number 1 prospect, there's a pretty good chance it's all but a guarantee you're going to be good at some level. And if like these lower minors guys, it's far from a guarantee. So everybody just needs to kind of remember that.
And then there's the other side of that where people look at the pipeline list. Are like, oh, well, Classen and Aldegari aren't really very high on this list. We made out really well. Like, well, no, like they were good pitching prospects this year for sure. So it's a whole thing. But
yeah, the only prospect list I trust anymore is Matt Winkelman's because he just keeps up with it so much, and I respect his opinion a ton.
Yep, and he knows the people. Even if he doesn't know something, he knows the people who do. So
yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah, we can move on to the Austin Hayes trade unless you got anything else to say on that. I think
the
only other thing I would say is another trade with the Angels. A decent bit of trade history there with Syndergaard and then Ohapi Marsh, and then also now Estevez. So definitely some connections there. So something to keep an eye on in future deadlines. But I do want to talk about Hayes. We talked about the Sir Anthony part of it already, which was good. And I'd imagine you don't have too much to say on Pache. We knew he wasn't going to be on the team later this week. So it's unfortunate, but
yeah, it's very, very similar to Sir Anthony. The highs were very, very high for him, and the lows were very, very, very low because this year he has been pretty much 0. I mean, that's just a nice way of putting it. And he's probably not going to be on the Orioles roster for very long, if I were to guess. I mean, because they already have a jam-packed outfield, so maybe he's just like a defensive replacement for them or a guy to steal a base.
That's why Hayes got traded. They didn't have room for it.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why, because they have so many good prospects. Like the Orioles are going to be so good for so many years. I actually hate it so much. Probably because they're so close by. Like it's just kind of like a natural rivalry, just like geography-wise. Yeah. But, I mean, I think Pache, I mean, he was obviously very loved around here by all the players. So it's kind of a shame to see him go in that sense. But, I mean, I ultimately just don't care if you're that bad on the field.
No. And again, you had to going to the deadline, you at least needed a platoon at the very least. Yeah. We knew Pache was not going to do that this year. So that was like the lowest criteria for getting an outfield bat. It wasn't like last year where, oh, well, we felt out the market and then we're not going to get anyone. No, you needed someone this year. You had to get someone, and they did. And I want to talk about Hayes. I gave a lot of my thoughts on, what was it, Friday when he got traded? And I had an eye on him earlier in the year, but I just didn't think, especially him being an all-star last year, I knew he was up for an extension after 2026 and he was looking to get that done. And I don't know. I guess in hindsight, maybe I should have seen him as more of a trade target, but contender to contender trades they're very, very rare. Not very rare, but they don't always happen. Right. And I just didn't think, I don't know. He wasn't really someone who was necessarily on my radar as a deadline. And we didn't hear his name very much in a lot of trade talk. So honestly, for the best, though, I mean, the Phillies kept it kind of under wraps, and so did the O's, too. But I don't have any problems with this deal, Drew. I mean, it was, again, you gave up nothing. You got something you really needed. You opened up room for the Estevez trade, and you get a guy who mashes lefties. And before this year, even though he's not hitting righties well this year, he had hit righties at least at a very serviceable level before this year. So he could absolutely be an everyday left fielder. I don't think he needs to be. I also don't think he needs to just be a platoon. So I think you're going to see him play a little bit more than a platoon, maybe not quite every day, but he's going to play a lot. And they're going to figure out by October what the best combination is. It seems like they're kind of leaning more towards a Marsh Rojas platoon in center. Some thoughts on that. But just speaking to Hayes specifically, great player, really great defender. Obviously not having his best year right now, but shorter fence in left field. That's going to benefit him in the outfield and at the plate. I think this makes a lot of sense. A guy who I believe he was a former top prospect at one point, and he's been a really solid major league player. And there's a lot of potential there for him working with Kevin Long. And you have him next year too. I really like that a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you on that 100%. I mean, Sir Anthony was on an expiring deal, and obviously there was probably not going to be a reunion unless he really stepped it up in the second half. So it kind of made all the sense because the Phillies needed an outfielder and the Orioles needed a reliever. And not very often you're going to see two World Series contenders making trades in the middle of the season, but definitely cool when it happens for sure. I mean, obviously, like you said, Hayes was not an everyday guy this year. I don't know if they were just strictly platooning him or what was going on, but I know they just had such a packed outfield. They just didn't have playing time for everybody that they had. So it just kind of made sense for them to move on from him. I mean, obviously, they still loved him. I mean,
right.
You had to give up a good reliever to get him. I mean, obviously, Sir Anthony wasn't having a good year this year, but in the last few years, he's been serviceable, and the Orioles were desperate for a reliever. So it just kind of worked out for both teams. Kind of a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, Sir Anthony was really good prior to this year. So maybe they have pitching development over there that can help them turn it around. But I mean, I also trust our development just as much to have Austin Hayes playing at a pretty high level. And I think for both him and Carlos Estevez, they really obviously we don't see it with Estevez yet. I would imagine he's pretty motivated to pitch very well. You don't get many opportunities to pitch in October. And especially for Carlos too, this is a guy who spent his career with the Rockies and the Angels. I think he maybe saw one postseason with the Rockies at best. I'm not sure if he did or not. But
yeah, he did. 2017.
Yeah, that's a long time ago now. This guy's waited a long time to get back to October. You're telling me he's not going to be motivated when you're getting 40,000 fans packed in there, not just in the playoffs, the rest of this season too. If I were him, I'd be really excited. And he said just that. So I mean, I think there's a lot of motivation for him. I think you see with Austin Hayes, he already did the shimmy on first base the other day. I think there's motivation there for him as well. I don't think he had any bad blood with the Orioles, but they didn't want you. They didn't want to extend you. You were an all-star last year, and they sent you away this year. And I think also when you look at the back end of those two bullpens, Sir Anthony and Kimbrel at the end of games, and then the top five we have, yeah, I'm okay with that. That's fine. No disrespect to Sir Anthony, but I mean, I'm very okay with where our bullpen is at right now comparatively. But point being, that's a side note. Yeah, I mean, I think Austin Hayes is a great move. Again, I would have been ecstatic if we could have gotten someone like that last year. I was so upset that we did not get an outfield bat at the deadline last season, and I still am. I honestly still am, but this definitely helps make up for it. And it was worth the 2-3 year, I guess 2 year wait. Maybe it was. I guess you go back to the start of last year, year and a half, whatever. But yeah. I mean, look, I think both of these moves are very good. The title of this video is, did the Phillies do enough? I mean, in your eyes, with these two moves, let me ask you a two-part question. Do you think they did enough, first off? And do you think they're done? Do you think there's any other moves they can make around the edges? Do you think there's any other big moves potentially? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think I'll answer the second part first because the first part's kind of a tricky question. I mean, it's like a double-sided coin, I guess you could say. But anyway, the second part, I mean, I think there could be another significant-ish kind of move, not like a lockdown closer or anything, but like a good bullpen arm if that would fall into their arms. Like if somebody would come to them and be like, hey, we really like this prospect, and if you want to trade him, we'll give you this bullpen arm. And he's a serviceable major leaguer. I mean, I think the Phillies would go for that, especially if the guy has years of control, because I think the Phillies obviously don't want to give up any more of their decent prospects, but if you put a fancy bullpen arm in front of their eyes, I mean, they might definitely go for it. I mean, I think the outfield's definitely set. I mean, there's no way they're going for another guy because Luis Robert, I don't even want to know what it would take to get that guy at this point.
No, they're not getting him.
Yeah, I mean it's just ridiculous, the asking price from what I've heard from a couple different people, and it's not realistic unless you want to give up your top 2 or 3 prospects in one deal. I mean, I wouldn't do it, and I don't think the Phillies are going to do it either. So, but to answer the first part of your question, did they do enough? I would say probably yes, just because everybody's performing at their worst that they have this season so far right now, and they're still playing like 500 ball roughly. I mean, they're still losing series, but if this is as bad as it gets, I mean, what's it really matter? Like, they're going to be fine. They were winning. They were on 100 and whatever 15 win pace before the All-Star break. So you just, if you look into the last couple series as like defining the season or what's to come, you just got to get a little bit of a reality check, because that's just not how baseball works. I mean, teams slump. Like the Yankees were the second best team in baseball for 70 games, and now they've been playing terrible for a month. So.
Was it 11-23 in their last 34 or something like that?
It's
terrible.
Yeah, it's just really bad. And baseball happens. I mean, like you've seen a guy making his major league debut today. Kyle Schwarber hits 2 bombs off of him, and Bryce Harper strikes out looking like a fool against him. Like it's just baseball. Things happen. I mean, everybody's going to get going again at some point, and it's going to be fun to watch, just like it was the first 100 games of the season. So everybody just needs to kind of reel back in a little bit and have some patience with them. They played so good the first few months of the season. They kind of built themselves a barrier to be able to have kind of stretches like this where they aren't playing at their best, they're not pitching at their best, whatever it may be. And I think Rob Thompson said something along the lines today of like, on days where we hit, we don't pitch, and on days where we pitch, we don't hit. It's just happens. It really does. And obviously there was one exception to that I kind of wanted to talk about. Yesterday, Tyler Phillips, man, what a special outing. That was so cool to watch. I mean, obviously the hometown kid, so it's so fun. And obviously he's a big reason why they're not going after a starter, I think. Even if it's just like a back end type of starter.
Yeah. Think about the depth you have for that number 5 spot right now. Turnbull's on the IL, and you have Tyler Phillips. And look, I know Taijuan Walker is not very good, but he will at the least go out there and throw the baseball for you. Like, at the very least, he will go out there and give you 5 innings of 4 or 5 run ball, which is not good. But I don't think a lot of other teams have 3 guys in their number 5 spot who could all be fine, right? That doesn't happen. And then you have the top 4 you have, obviously. But Tyler Phillips, man, again, going from the 700 level at the vet to pitching complete game shutouts in Citizens Bank Park, that's really cool. I mean, that's special.
Yeah.
Special stuff. Really happy for him, too. A guy who was at the playoff games last year, and now he's pitching, helping the Phillies get back to the postseason, too. That stuff doesn't happen very often. You got to just appreciate those types of stories, man. It's a feel-good story. And he's been good for 3 starts now, too. The numbers won't show how good he was in that major league debut start. Not the first game, not his debut, his first start. I think he did give up 4 runs, but he came out of the game 6 innings, 3 earned runs. I mean, it was a quality start at the time. And his debut was really good, too. You take that from your like 8th starter. I mean, if that's your worst case scenario, like, it's fine. And I don't think they came into the year even thinking he was the 8th starter either. So
right. He kind of forced their hand.
Right. So just really cool stuff, man. I mean, his debut was really cool, but again, we were down big to the Braves, so no one thought too much of it. But then he's followed it up with three really good starts, and we're 3-0 with him as a starter so far. So at the very least, I think he's probably your long man in the playoffs. And that's a pretty sweet long man to have, because he showed you in his debut he can pitch out of the bullpen if needed. And the sweeper is going to be a really good pitch in the playoffs. Like, that'll play. You could even put him in some big spots for an inning or 2 if other guys aren't available. He definitely isn't going to be the first guy to do that, but it's a possibility. It's a real potential possibility. So yeah, man, I'm glad you brought him up. I was going to bring him up when you said that's baseball. It just happens. And that's a great example of that too. I mean, sometimes you just have stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, we kind of ran into the Guardians when they weren't playing their best ball. So we kind of got spared a little bit. I mean, they obviously lost the series, but it was a lot closer than it probably should have been based on how the Phillies were playing, because what they did in the first game of the series, that's just unacceptable. I mean, there's really just no way around that. I mean, terrible defense, bad hitting. I don't even know. Like, Bryce Harper looked like he'd never played first base before. I don't know what he was doing. But obviously he's been so good this year, you kind of just brush it off to the side. But I mean, like, if it's a playoff situation, like, the Guardians are a playoff team. They're going to be in the playoffs. If you run into them and you play like that, you're not going to win. That's just pretty simply put. I mean, obviously, like you would expect more in a big spot. Like it's just a regular season series, so they're probably not quite amped up like they would be if it was 40,000 people in Citizens Bank Park in the playoffs. But I mean, it's just kind of a little bit disheartening to see them play bad baseball against good teams.
Absolutely, it is. I mean, again, you want to play your best in those types of games, and yesterday it was like, oh, they woke up, and then it was like, oh, today they used all their offense yesterday. So
yeah,
you'd rather. And speaking of that game one, Sanchez continues to not feel his position well. I really don't know why that continues to be a trend over his career, but got to be better. Just a number of times, like you got to take the out at first base. It was going to be a really tough play at home. I believe he dropped the ball at first base too on one that Bryce threw him, and just got to be better because that is him not knowing how many outs there were in that playoff game cost us as well. And that's really the only concern I have with Sanchez because I think his stuff plays really well in postseason baseball. But regardless, I mean, we've been saying this the past few series, but I'm going to wipe it from the memory. Hopefully they do too. And honestly, like mid-August, that's hopefully when you start to build a little bit of momentum. You don't need to build all of it. And even in September, like you don't need to build a ton, but because they've gone into the playoffs not playing well in September before. But last year, I felt like they did build some momentum in September, and I felt like it benefited them. So if you can do that and then just wrap things up there, I mean, I think that's what's going to happen. I'm really not sweating over what's happened the past month, even the past 2 months. I mean, June, they were better than they were in July, I believe, but they weren't anything crazy. It's weird. They were probably better without the guys they had, without Schwarber and Harper and Realmuto. They played well without them, and now they're back and they can't figure things out. But again, there's going to be an adjustment period for those guys. So I'm not really too concerned. Just going back to the question that I asked you too. I mean, as far as did they do enough? I think they did. Like if we go into the playoffs and we choke or we get eliminated or something happens, I don't think it's going to be because of lack of deadline moves. Again, Luis Robert, there's an insane asking price on him right now. You're just not going to do what they're asking for. And as far, and I would imagine they're honestly with the offers, I don't know what the offers are, obviously, but I would imagine based off what we would guess the Phillies are willing to give up and what we would guess the White Sox want, they're probably pretty far apart. And again, they got Austin Hayes. I'm not saying that rules you out from getting Luis Robert, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And I'm not expecting it to. And I honestly wasn't expecting it to for most of the month either. And as far as getting a guy like Mason Miller, it's not even a guarantee he gets traded. The A's do not have to trade him. And if they do, they're going to get an unbelievable package for him. And I just don't think the Phillies are too keen on giving up big prospects just because you're getting a guy who can pitch one inning. And I think Mason Miller's great. But even if you gave your best offer for him, I don't think your best offer is going to beat out the other offers for Mason Miller. Every team who's a contender should be asking for that guy. So I just wanted to say that. And then I forget what the second part of my question was that I asked you, but
do you think that's it? I think.
Yeah. So I think they may go get like a back end bullpen guy. Like I know someone mentioned that we had some interest in Chad Green from Toronto, and he's had a good year. Sure. I mean, if he's available for the right price, I could see that happening, but he's also under control till 2026. So it might cost a little bit more. The reliever market is definitely expensive right now. I mean, look, if they could get someone like Mason Miller's teammate, Lucas Erceg, who I really like, sure, but he's pre-arb, so he's going to cost a decent bit as well in a trade. There's not a lot of names I'm looking at that I'm like, this would be great. Like, you want to go get Matt Moore just to get an extra lefty from the Angels, bring him back? I mean, okay. I'm cool if they get a guy who falls into their lap. It's kind of like, I really don't disagree with what you said. If someone falls into their lap for the right price, sure, why not? But I don't think you need to do anything. I would actually like to see them go get a left-handed bench bat. I think that would be sweet. They don't have one right now. You can't have just Stubbs be that. But again, that's not something where it's like, if they don't get a left-handed bench bat, that's going to cost them in October. No, it's probably not going to cost them in October. Could you get a guy who can maybe pinch hit in those spots? Sure. But how many times did we actually use a pinch hitter in the last 2 postseasons? Very rarely. So I'm not going to be up in arms if they don't go get a left-handed bench bat. And there's not even a guarantee that guy comes through in a spot. But I would like to see it. But again, if these are the 2 moves they make, I'm completely fine. I honestly still give the deadline an A minus. Like, that's fine with me. If you want to give it a B plus because they overpaid for the Estevez deal, fine, whatever. Like, I'm not going to debate you too much on that. But point being, I think it was a successful deadline. So, yeah, that's all I really got. And then the Suarez injury. But go for it.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that's kind of complaining about what we gave up for like Estevez, just think about the fact that he's a rental reliever and he's obviously a closer. I mean, he's bona fide at this point. Obviously, he might not close for us all the time, but regardless, like that's the way the Angels probably valued him, like as a closer. And imagine what the asking price would be on Mason Miller. If you're mad that we gave up Classen and Algaderi for Estevez, think about what you'd be giving up for a guy like Mason Miller. Like,
Yeah.
it would be astonishing. Like people would be barnstorming Citizens Bank Park trying to get after Dombrowski if we gave up like Aiden Miller for like a reliever. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's really all I got. Because people will say, then why didn't you just do the Mason Miller deal? But again, you're giving up way more than that. It's just not that simple. Yeah. So, also something noteworthy. I don't think this is Phillies related, but Brenton Doyle got pulled from the game today without an injury. So, be interested to hear from the Rockies post game if there's any information on that. Something to keep an eye on. He was someone who got mentioned to us in a previous podcast, but I don't think I know I didn't really think there was much of a chance because he's a young player who is having a really strong year this year. But the Rockies aren't the brightest bulbs in the box, so maybe they are trading him. I don't know. But that being said, the only other thing I wanted to talk about was the Ranger injury. It was probably about time. His back's been bothering him. He's not pitching well. He hasn't quite been right for ever since he came back from the hand injury. Honestly, he just hasn't been quite right. I'm not saying he's still injured with his hand, but I think that threw off a little rhythm that he was in. I think he's been trying to find it ever since. And again, he's pitching a lot more than he has in the past. Just because of being a starter the last couple seasons, his innings limit continues to get pushed. And the last couple seasons he's been hurt, so he still hasn't reached like what he would reach this year in a maximum innings, or like I guess what his height would be in innings for a season. So yeah, he was definitely on pace to shatter his career high in innings, if I'm not mistaken, this year. And I think we all figured this was something that was probably going to happen at some point. And it's for the best. I think they will be able to survive without him. Yeah, I'm not super concerned, but it will be interesting what they do in that time because obviously Colby Allard, again, not a major league pitcher in my opinion, but they'll figure it out though, and I'm not really too concerned about it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really concerned at all. I mean, if this is as bad as it gets, just hang in there. They'll play better, so I'm not really worried about it. Obviously, I kind of want to talk about something real quick that's not to do with the Phillies, but the Braves just lost another starting pitcher, Ronaldo Lopez. I mean, what are they going to do? I have no idea. They already have no starting pitching, so yeah. I mean, that's why you don't take a reliever, put him in the rotation, and let him pitch a full season. That's just what happens. I mean, forearm tightness, that usually is not a good sign. It usually ends up being something with the UCL or something with the elbow. So, I mean, obviously, hopefully, best wishes for him. I mean, I don't want to see somebody like that get hurt, but it's definitely a shame for the Braves because they're already very thin in starting pitching.
Yeah, and how about Whit Merrifield going there? He signs, and then the day of the first game he's about to play, he gets hurt pregame with his finger.
Yeah, crazy.
You can't make it up right now. That team is going through it. And as far as this goes, I mean, looking like Detroit 2.0, I don't think Detroit made the NLCS like we did. Obviously, they're in the AL, but point being, I don't think Detroit quite reached the same heights of success we have the past 2 years. And also, Dombrowski was a big swing guy before he got to Philadelphia. Not always, but for the most part, he took a lot of big swings. And now he's taking a little bit of a different approach in Philadelphia. He's taking his big swings in the offseason, not giving up the farm, and he's using the farm to then go get the pieces they need at the deadline. I mean, last year is really the only deadline I think you can really complain about. It wasn't the best one, but every year he's gone out and addressed the potential needs for the team. I mean, that's pretty much happened every single deadline he's been here. And again, they've made a World Series and they've made an NLCS, and they're the best team in baseball right now. So I don't know if Detroit necessarily did all those things.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I don't really have anything to add to that, to be honest with you, because, I mean, if this was Detroit 2.0, we wouldn't have Aiden Miller. We wouldn't have Andrew Painter. Like, they're not selling the farm for these big-time, like, guys that are on the trade block. So, I don't know. I just don't really have anything else to add to that.
Right. And again, I get it. I get the Tigers made the World Series too. But, yeah, their success depends on winning the World Series. They're the best team in baseball right now. Again, they have the roster to go do it. And also, I think you have to remember, look at it. Drew said it. Look around the league. Look around the league. The Dodgers have 15 plus guys on the injured list right now. That's another thing. The Phillies have been pretty durable despite the injuries they've had this year, relatively to other teams. The Dodgers also don't necessarily scare me a ton when it comes to the playoffs. There are teams that could get hot in the wild card. That happens in baseball. Like, that is a concern too. But if they lose in the playoffs this year, it's not going to be because of Dombrowski not filling the right needs or not putting together the right roster. It's going to be because these guys don't show up in the big moment and they go cold in the short series and they get beat. So it's all about the mentality they have, and it's about the coaching to me, and it's about who shows up. I don't think it's really about, like, Dombrowski's put the pieces together and he's put the roster on the field that needs to win. Evidenced by the record this year. And again, looking around the league, there's not really many other teams I'm super concerned about right now. So if they collapse in the playoffs, I wouldn't necessarily put that on Dombrowski. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah. I mean, today they lost, and 2 through 6 in the lineup went 0 for 18, I think. So
right.
You just ain't going to win games like that. And then if you had a guy like Luis Robert or something, like, sell the farm and get him, I mean, he might win you 1 or 2 more games down the stretch, but it's like, if the whole team's not hitting, there's a good chance you're not going to win the game.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know. I kind of talked about everything I have to talk about at this point, I think.
Sure. Yeah, and again, I get the D-backs beat us last year. I do. But the Dodgers also lost to the D-backs as well, and their success also depends on winning the World Series. Like, it wasn't like the Phillies were the only ones who collapsed in the playoffs last year. It happens. And I'm not saying there's not reasons for concern here. I'm not. But again, look at the other teams right now. There is no team that does not have reasons to be concerned. And our concerns are a lot less than the other contenders at the moment. So I'm not really going to be too worried about a July slump right now when they just added a couple pieces and they have 2 months to figure this out. Like, every team has problems right now, and it's the middle of the season. This is the time to slump. Like, I wouldn't have said this the last 2 years. I would have been really upset the last 2 years if we were playing like this. But like Calvin said, I think a lot of the opinions are soured by how the last 12 games have gone, and we're just in a cold stretch right now. It's a 162-game season. That's just going to happen. Football, you can't afford slumps. Baseball, you absolutely can. So anyway, like you said, we've said everything we got to say. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate all of you. Want to thank you guys. And again, we'll be live more often now that the end of the season is coming up. Tune in. Let us know your guys' thoughts. If you guys are watching the replay, drop a comment. Let us know your opinions on the trades. And yeah, anything you want to say, Drew?
Nope. I mean, I hope they add more guys. That's all I'm saying. I hope they do, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. So
yep. Don't anticipate it. So
yep, exactly.
Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate y'all. We'll go live at some point this week, probably on Tuesday, to talk about the trade deadline as a whole around the league. And yeah, God bless you guys. Have a good one. Peace.